A powerful German shepherd lunges forward, muscles rippling, teeth bared, eyes locked on a trembling old man clutching a worn duffel bag. And then, something unthinkable happens. The canine doesn't bite. Instead, he freezes. Inches away from the old man, the dog stops dead in his tracks, ears twitching, tail stiff, a low, confused whimper breaking through the chaos. The officers stare in disbelief. Parents clutch their children. The old man's lips move ever so slightly, and with a trembling voice, he whispers a single word that changes everything. What would you do if a police dog, trained to attack without hesitation, suddenly recognized the very man he was about to bring down? Stay with me, because what happened in the next few minutes silenced an entire city, brought hardened officers to tears, and proved that loyalty, once forged, can survive even war, trauma, and 6 long years of separation. This is the unbelievable true story of a canine dog, an old forgotten soldier, and a reunion so powerful it reminded the world that love never dies. Before we start the story, listen carefully. This is not an ordinary tale. What you're about to witness will shake your soul and stay in your heart forever. That's why you must subscribe right now, because if you miss stories like this, you'll miss the chance to feel something real in a world full of noise, and I want you to prove you're truly part of this journey. Tell us in the comments which country you're watching from and what this story made you feel inside. Now, let's begin. Then came the order. Release the dog. The shepherd lunged forward, sprinting toward the suspect. The shepherd charged like a bullet, eyes burning with focus. People screamed. Officers shouted warnings. Daniel didn't move. His old boots stayed planted in the dirt, his hand trembling slightly at his side. The moment stretched into eternity. The dog leapt, teeth flashing in the floodlights. But then, just inches from Daniel, the unthinkable happened. The shepherd froze. His body stiffened midair, paws landing just short of the old man's legs. His growl turned into a confused whimper. His ears twitched, and his eyes, once filled with fury, softened into something else entirely. Recognition. The crowd went silent. You could almost hear hearts beating. Daniel's lips moved. His voice cracked with age but carried a weight that silenced even the night air. Alpha? The shepherd blinked. The name cut through the noise like a blade. His chest rose and fell in sharp, desperate breaths, and then slowly he lowered his head. The old soldier's trembling hand reached out, hovering in the space between man and dog. The shepherd didn't attack. He didn't retreat. He pressed forward, closing the space, and rested his scarred head against the man's hand. Gasps turned to silence, then silence turned to tears. The officers stood frozen, their training shattered by a sight they couldn't explain. Parents held their children tighter. Some people filmed, others simply stood with wet eyes, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Because in that instant, it wasn't just a dog recognizing a stranger. It was a bond resurfacing, a bond that had survived bullets, explosions, and 6 long years apart. Daniel's shoulders shook as tears streamed freely down his wrinkled face. His knees buckled, and he sank to the ground. The shepherd followed, curling into him like no time had passed. The crowd erupted into whispers. What's happening? Why did the dog stop? Cameras were pulled out, screens lit up, every second captured by dozens of strangers who knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. But Daniel wasn't aware of the crowd. He wasn't even aware of the flashing lights or the sharp voices of officers yelling for the dog to obey. He saw only one thing, the same loyal eyes he had once trusted more than his own. Alpha whimpered again, a sound raw and aching, as though 6 years of distance had finally caught up with him. He stepped forward, lowering his body, tail stiff at first and then slowly wagging, cautious, hesitant, hopeful. And then, in a single heartbeat, the dog pressed his head into Daniel's chest. Gasps filled the air. Some people clapped their hands over their mouths. Others wiped tears from their eyes. The tough officers, men trained to face danger without flinching, stood paralyzed. One of them muttered under his breath, "No way. That's impossible." But impossible or not, it was real. A bond forged in war had just broken through years of silence. Daniel fell to his knees, his hand buried in the thick fur of the shepherd he had once called brother. His wrinkled face pressed into the dog's neck, and the tears that spilled down his cheeks were not just tears of joy, they were tears of memories, memories that came flooding back with the force of a storm. He remembered dusty battlefields, the echo of gunfire, the way Alpha had charged through smoke to drag wounded men to safety. He remembered nights under a torn canvas tent, when the sound of the dog's breathing was the only proof he wasn't alone. He remembered calling Alpha's name when the chaos of war had nearly swallowed him whole, and how the dog had always come back. Always. And now, against all odds, here he was again. The officers approached cautiously, unsure what to do. One of them reached for Alpha's leash, but the dog growled low, protective, refusing to let anyone come between him and Daniel. It wasn't aggression, it was loyalty, a silent promise that no one would take this moment away. The handler, a younger officer named Miller, looked shaken. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "He's our unit's best K9. He doesn't freeze. He doesn't disobey." Daniel looked up at him, his voice rough but steady. "He's not just a dog. He's a soldier. My soldier." The crowd erupted again, their whispers now turning into excited chatter. Phones zoomed in closer. Social media feeds exploded with live posts. This wasn't just an arrest scene anymore. It was history unfolding. As the chaos swirled, Daniel gently cupped Alpha's face. The shepherd's eyes shone, moist and desperate, as if to say, "Where have you been? Why did you leave me?" Daniel swallowed hard. "They told me you were gone. They told me you didn't make it." His voice broke on the last words. "And all these years, I blamed myself for leaving you behind." Alpha responded not with words but with action. He licked the old man's hand, whining softly, pushing closer as though trying to erase the years of pain between them. The officers didn't know what to do. The suspect, forgotten in the background, had already been pinned by two other officers, but no one cared about him anymore. All eyes were fixed on the strange, miraculous reunion unfolding right in front of them. The tension softened into something else now. People weren't just watching a police standoff. They were watching a story bigger than any crime scene. Parents whispered to their children, explaining that what they were seeing was rare, something worth remembering. A woman in the crowd began to cry openly, saying, "That's not just a dog, that's family." And she was right. Daniel sat on the ground, one hand gripping the duffel bag, the other buried in Alpha's fur. Slowly, he opened the bag and pulled out a small, torn cloth patch. It was faded, the stitching loose, but the symbol was clear, a military insignia. He held it up. "This," Daniel said, his voice carrying despite its weakness, "was from our unit. Alpha carried it on his vest the day we were separated." The dog's ears perked up at the sight. He leaned forward, sniffing it, then let out a sharp, almost desperate bark, as if confirming the truth. The crowd gasped again. Some even clapped. The moment was no longer just emotional, it was electric. Officer Miller stepped closer, kneeling beside Daniel. His voice was softer now, filled with something like respect. "Sir, if what you're saying is true, this dog has been serving with us for years. He's saved lives. He's protected our men." Daniel nodded, still stroking Alpha's fur. "I know. That's who he is. That's who he's always been. But before he was yours, he was mine." The officer hesitated, then looked at Alpha. The dog's choice was clear. Despite years of training, despite orders barked through radios and whistles, he sat firmly by Daniel's side, refusing to move. And yet, beneath all the emotion, a quiet tension remained. Questions buzzed in the air. What would happen next? Would the police allow this bond to continue, or would duty and ownership tear them apart again? Daniel knew the fight wasn't over, but for now he had Alpha back. For now the world had stopped to witness something pure, and for now, nothing else mattered. The sun dipped low over the park, painting the sky in strokes of gold and crimson. Frank sat on the grass, one hand trembling against Shadow's thick fur, the other wiping away tears he could no longer hold back. Around them the crowd remained frozen, not out of fear anymore, but reverence. Something extraordinary had unfolded before their eyes, something no video, no headline, could ever fully capture. The officers stood back, their stern faces softened, weapons lowered. The K9 officer still clutched the leash loosely, but he already knew. This was no longer his dog. Shadow had made his choice. He wasn't following orders, he was following love. Frank whispered again, "Shadow, you remember me." His voice cracked, a lifetime of grief pressed into those words, and the dog answered, not with speech, but with loyalty deeper than any command. Shadow pressed his head harder into Frank's lap, tail thumping once, twice, before curling against him like he'd found home again. The tension that had once choked the air dissolved into something else, something sacred. Parents held their children tighter, teaching them silently what loyalty looked like. Teenagers lowered their phones mid-recording, realizing they weren't just capturing content, they were witnessing history. Even hardened officers felt their throats tighten. Then, the words that changed everything. "He's not my dog," the K-9 officer said softly, unclipping the leash. "Not anymore." A cheer broke out from the crowd, but Frank didn't hear it. He was lost in Shadow's gaze, those same eyes that had once stared through sandstorms, smoke, and gunfire beside him. He had thought them gone forever, yet here they were, alive, bright, and fixed only on him. Then, the words that changed everything. "He's not my dog," the K-9 officer said softly, unclipping the leash. "Not anymore." A cheer broke out from the crowd, but Frank didn't hear it. He was lost in Shadow's gaze, those same eyes that had once stared through sandstorms, smoke, and gunfire beside him. He had thought them gone forever, yet here they were, alive, bright, and fixed only. The commander looked down at the frail veteran, then at the dog curled protectively at his side. Shadow's ears flicked, alert, as though bracing for another separation. But instead, the officer's voice broke through. "No, sir. We're not taking him away. We're bringing him home." Gasps, then applause. The crowd erupted, some crying openly, and for the first time in 6 years, Frank smiled without pain. Shadow barked once, a short, joyful sound that seemed to echo like an oath sworn before the world. Weeks later, Frank and Shadow found themselves in a quiet, veteran-assisted living community. It wasn't much, but it was everything they needed. A modest room, warm meals, and a patch of grass outside where Shadow could stretch his legs. The first night, Frank lay down on a real bed, something he hadn't done in years. Beside him, on a blanket, Shadow sighed heavily, that deep, familiar exhale Frank remembered from their bunkers overseas. The sound brought tears to his eyes, but this time, they were tears of peace. In the morning, staff gathered just to watch them. Shadow, once a disciplined K-9 trained to attack on command, now trotted happily beside Frank, nudging him playfully if he walked too slowly. Children from the neighborhood brought biscuits and toys. Veterans stopped by, some breaking down as they petted the dog, whispering stories they hadn't told in decades. Shadow wasn't just Frank's salvation anymore. He was becoming a healer for everyone who crossed his path. Frank, too, began to change. His distant stare softened. His trembling voice grew steadier when he spoke. Each day he felt less invisible, less forgotten, because with Shadow by his side, people saw him again, not as a broken old man, but as a survivor. One afternoon, a journalist visited. She asked Frank, "After all you've been through, what does this reunion mean to you?" Frank paused, eyes glistening. He looked at Shadow, who sat loyally at his feet, head tilted in that same way he always had during missions. And then Frank said, "I thought I lost everything. My brothers, my home, my purpose. But this dog, he remembered me, and because of that I remembered myself. Sometimes the dog you save is the one who saves you." The screen fades to a final shot. Frank and Shadow walking slowly down a tree-lined path at sunset, their shadows stretching long across the grass. Frank leans on a cane, Shadow steady at his side, as if guiding him one last mission. Frank murmurs almost to himself, "You never forgot me, did you, boy?" Shadow lifts his face toward him, eyes shining in the fading light. His tail swishes once, strong and sure. And as the music swells, the audience is left with a truth they'll never shake. Loyalty doesn't fade, love doesn't forget, and sometimes, the greatest heroes walk on 4 legs. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Tell us in the comments what was the most powerful moment for you. And also share which country you're watching from. We'd love to see how far Shadow and Frank's story travels across the world. And if you believe in second chances, in loyalty that never dies, and in the healing bond between humans and dogs, make sure to subscribe. Because here, every story reminds us that love, no matter how broken, can always find its way home.